Rode my bike from Maine to Niagara Falls to Key West. You asked the questions, these are my answers. First question is, why did I decide to do this trip? Spent a lot of time dreaming about big adventures, read plenty of stories, watched plenty of YouTubes of the people doing it, and I just wanted to do it myself. How did I decide that now was the time? I joked along the way that it was my midlife crisis. I had just turned 40. My daughter had just turned 18, graduated high school. She was off doing her college thing. Empty nester, no significant other. Born and raised in the same area, so it was just time to do something different. Everything just kind of fell in line and it worked out. How did I decide to do the route that I ended up doing? So it started with the East Coast Greenway. Obviously that runs from Maine down to Key West, but it follows more or less Route 1, which growing up on the East Coast, I'm familiar with Route 1. I've been to a lot of the areas. I've been to New York City and whatnot. And while they're not bad, it's not really places I wanted to go. Plus, I was big into gravel. So I wanted to add a lot of gravel to the mix. There was also places like Niagara Falls that I love to do. The Great Allegheny Passage from Pittsburgh to Cumberland. And I just wanted to do something a little bit different. Find the route, since I wasn't really doing a pre-planned route. Definitely Googled, looked for rail trails, looked for any sort of established trails like that. I got on Reddit, I asked the bicycle touring crowd, the gravel crowd, and kind of just got some ideas here and there and kind of hodgepodged them together. How did I make it happen? I was fortunate enough that I made enough money I could set aside savings for the last 2 years. If it wasn't for the trip or wasn't buying stuff for the bike, I really didn't spend money on it. I wasn't planning on going back, so I was renting a house. I gave up that. I don't have a significant other, so there was nothing there I had to worry about. All it was me. So I quit my job, I gave up the house, and I did the 3 months purely on savings. Did I calculate the route? Did I calculate every stop? Was it kind of winging it? It was a little bit of both. Like, I had the route pretty much calculated until I decided to jump off. There was a couple places I knew I was stopping, but I didn't have a time frame of when I was going to get there. I didn't have a set, okay, I need to go 55 miles to the next campground. A lot of it was just kind of seeing how the day went. There was a couple times where I just stopped because I came across a campground. A couple of days where I was making good time, so I just kind of kept going. In the end, other than a few locations, I more or less just went until I needed to stop or found a good place to stop. How often have I done trips? I got into bike packing in 2020. I did the Allegheny Passage. I've done some weekend rides with my friends. I did a week-long ride where it was 500 miles. Never did anything quite this long, and especially this long on a bicycle. The longest I've done before this trip was a week long, about 500 miles. It was a fun trip, and it did prepare me for what I was getting myself into. It was definitely the inspiration of saying, hey, I can make this happen. This is possible. Do I ever travel in different methods? Yes, I have traveled by car, I have traveled by RV, I have traveled by motorcycle. I went from Virginia to Oklahoma and back by motorcycle. I spent plenty of time backpacking. So the whole adventure exploring thing wasn't new, although traveling by bike was, to a certain degree was. My bicycle setup. I'll have to make a video digging deeper into it, but I rode a Specialized Diverge, so a gravel bike. I had tail fin set up on the rear, and or lead on the forks with Relevate design sprinkled throughout. Gear that I didn't use and sent back. I didn't end up using my GoPro stuff. There's a couple little kitchen stuff that I end up sending back because I wasn't really using it. Gear that I picked up along the way. I was searching for the perfect cup of coffee. I went through a couple different coffee methods. I ended up with an AeroPress, and really that was about it as far as things I picked up. I did change out my tent pegs just because I broke some of them, but for the most part I had everything I needed, and I was pretty good at not having too much stuff that I did not. My thoughts the night before I actually left. So sitting there in Lubec, Maine, night before, it was definitely oh crap, this is it, this is happening, there's no turning back now. It's like definitely a little nervous. I knew I could do it, but I had to prove it to myself, and I'm sure there was some doubts from friends and family to a certain degree. Although I'm pretty sure everybody knows I'm hard-headed and stubborn, and I was gonna get it done one way or another. First day of my trip. What did I feel like? I felt, this is fine. This is normal. This is like what I've done before. Once I actually started pedaling, about 10 minutes into it, it was like no other bike packing trip. The only thing that really was different was the fact that I knew it was going to be a long period of time. But other than that, it was just like I was going on any other trip. Did people differ from state to state? Honestly, other than accents, which I got asked a lot, it's like, what part of the South are you from? When I was up north, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between people. There's more of a difference between small town and being in a big city versus up north versus down south. States where it was easiest to camp. I'm gonna go with wild camping or free camping. The states that were easiest to wild camp or free camp were New York and West Virginia. A lot of that did have to do with my route. Across New York, I took the Empire State Trail, so there was a lot of camping at the various locks. In West Virginia, I did the Blackwater Canyon Trail and the Greenbrier Trail. Both have areas that you can camp on. So a lot of it did have to do with my actual routes, with the pre-routed that were actually just set up for camping. States that are most bicycle friendly. Probably the most bicycle friendly places isn't a state but a region. The whole New England plus New York. Pretty much all the roads have wide shoulders. It doesn't have anything to do with biking per se, probably more areas so they can push snow, but it definitely comes in handy for cyclists. Worst states for bicyclists, I would say, would be North Carolina, South Carolina, and a lot of that's because of I spent time on 17, US 17. There's no shoulder in a lot of places, and it's super busy. It's not a good place. My favorite camp food to make was Funyun French onion soup. There's a YouTuber, Monty Boca, is one of his recipes. You basically rehydrate, boil some beef jerky, add some Funyuns, let that cook a little bit, throw some bread on top, and you melt some cheese, and it makes for a really good soup. My favorite food anywhere had to be the Rochester garbage plates. If you know, you know. Favorite snacks. Two of the things I picked up a lot were a variety pack that had Nutter Butters, it had Oreos, and it had Chips Ahoy's. The Chips Ahoy's were always the last thing ate, or I did give some away. The Nutter Butters and Oreos were definitely top tier. Another thing I snacked on a lot were Rice Krispie treats. I did stay away from granola bars and stuff like that. I wasn't really feeling it. It's kind of funny It's like what you think you're gonna want when you're on the tour versus what you actually want when you're doing it tends to be two different things. I also craved a lot of Pepsi, which I didn't drink a lot of soda at all before I left. And Arnold Palmer's also helps that they are still about $1 and they're pretty big cans. My favorite places, state, city, region, whatever. New England was definitely my favorite, especially Vermont, Burlington area. I went up the trail that cut up through Lake Champlain. So that was a super fun area for me. Rochester, New York was super fun. I met up with a friend, got to hang out with him for a little bit. Also a pretty nice place to explore. And the Empire State Trail was super fun for me. If nothing else, you end up crossing paths with a lot of people that were going West Coast to East Coast, or just doing the Empire State Trail itself, which is 500 some miles. So you got to talk to a lot of like-minded people. The state that surprised me the most was Florida. At least on the coast, there was a lot of bike paths, bike lanes. It was really easy to get around. There was a lot of money there, so it was kind of cool to watch the various cars. I saw Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and probably 90% of the mid-engine Corvettes are all in Florida. So if you like the car watch, it was pretty cool. I ran down the coast, so got to people watch. And overall, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, although it was definitely the most expensive state that I ended up in. Did it feel like 3 months? Not really. It really didn't. You were doing a lot of the same things. I mean, you were just getting up, packing up, riding your bike, taking pictures, setting up camp. I met a lot of people. I saw a lot of things. And for the most part, just kind of blurred together. How did the time pass? It just depended on where I was at. There was periods of times where it was just creeping, wasn't really getting the mileage done, whether it was having to do with a bunch of climbing or bad weather. Areas on the south that was just straight, boring. You weren't seeing anything. It's like straight road with trees on either side. So there was definitely times where it felt like it was dragging, while other times you'd go 25, 50 miles or 3-4 hours and you didn't even know it, because there was just so much to see, so much to do, and it was just a fun experience. But there was definitely the times where you're like, oh my God, is this day ever going to end? And a lot of that was in the South, which goes in hand with, did I ever get bored? And yes, like I said, it was mostly in the South, just because in the South, that's where everything was flat. There wasn't a lot of climbing, there wasn't a lot of descending. The roads tend to be straight because of it. So yes, the South. Did I get lonely? Not normally. For the most part, technology, I was never that far away from talking to anybody. And people were very inquisitive. There's plenty of times I was just standing outside like a Dollar General and somebody would walk up, it's like, all right, what are you doing? This isn't normal. It's like, you're definitely doing something, going somewhere. So there was a lot of times where I just got to be able to talk to people. Could I do a longer ride? And the short answer is absolutely. The long answer is probably. I would definitely have to do things a little different. There at the end of the trip, I was doing a lot of higher miles that I would not do if I planned it out a little bit better. And I would definitely spend more time stretching and working out on some trigger areas. First thing I did after I finished, I went and got an alcoholic slushie. I was in Key West. Gotta go drink, right? It was also 80 couple degrees with high humidity, so something cold and alcoholic was perfect. My feelings once I completed, I felt accomplished, I felt proud, I felt tired, and honestly I was just kind of relieved that I didn't have any major issues. I planned it, I did it, I got it done, and also it was time to kind of do something else. Riding every day was fun, but it's nice being able to kind of work in some other stuff. Now that it's getting cold, snowboarding is definitely on the list. Trail magic. For those that don't know, it's people going out of their way to help out people that are doing trips like this. You see it a lot with the long distance trails like Appalachian trails. You come up to a crossroads and there's a cooler there with drinks or snacks. It's a little bit different in the scenario I was doing, but a lot of my trail magic was just running into various people, talking to them. I had a guy let me camp in his yard. He gave me, alcohol. They fed me in the morning, gave me coffee. Some of the campgrounds I was at, I was talking to my neighbors. I got invited to breakfast with them, or coffee, drinks. I had a guy in Richmond, Virginia pull over and wait for me to pass and be like, hey, do you want some water? I got some bottled water. I was talking to people in food trucks and they'd see the bike and they would start asking me questions, and they hooked me up with extra food for free. So yes, trail magic was a fairly common thing. Things always change routing. So I actually made a change in my routing, as I was supposed to be in the mountains longer than what I was. I ended up jumping across to get to the coast. If I were to do it again, I would follow that routing, but I wouldn't stay on the coast as long as I did. I would kind of move more inland, especially Florida. I kind of want to go more down the middle than what I end up doing. There was a couple areas I want to go back and hit again, so we'll see. Bike setup, what would I change differently? I would change my tail fin panniers, and I would change my fork bleed fork bags. My panniers both broke. I will get into that on a different video. And my fork bags, I actually lost one of them. They kind of bounced off and I didn't notice somehow. Luckily it was just off the bike clothes, so nothing major. I was able to pretty quickly and easily replace what was in there. Although I did lose my nano puff, which makes me sad. That would be pretty much the only thing I would change as far as the bike. What would I change for other stuff? I'd probably simplify my cooking setup. My sleeping bag was the Enlighten Equipment Accomplice, so it was a 2-person bag that was for 20 degrees. The temperature rating worked out pretty good, but with 2 people, it didn't pack down the smallest in the world. So I'd probably go for a smaller bag. Other than that, everything kind of worked out pretty well. I don't have any major complaints. I didn't feel like I was wanting for anything that I did not have. Was it harder or easier than what I thought it would be? And the answer is yes. It was actually a lot easier physically than what I thought it would be. Of course, kind of rode myself into shape as it went along. I think the hardest part about it was just finding some place to sleep sometimes, some nights. That was a little bit harder than what I thought it would be, especially being able to sleep somewhere where I felt comfortable. What surprised me the most was there wasn't a lot of free time at the end of the day. I started in mid-August. Obviously, I was losing daylight every day as it went along. The time change happened the last week of my trip, so it was getting dark pretty early. So by the time I got going, I put in my miles and did everything I was going to do for the day. By the time I hit camp, setting up, making dinner, I found myself finishing things up around 9 or 10 o'clock, a lot more than what I thought was going to happen. Best thing about this trip, the people. Meeting people, talking to people, especially in person. I met a lot of cool people, but then there's people that's been following me through Instagram and Facebook. So super nice people, encouraging, the trail magic, just the people in general. But outside of that, exploring, being able to actually go and wander around and see some towns and some areas that I wanted to see, but I hadn't gotten a chance. And just kind of being able to take my time. The worst parts, not exploring enough. I didn't really have a time frame, at least not at first. The second half of my trip, there was parts where I did end up rushing more. There was also certain attractions where they were expensive, or they took too much time, or I didn't feel safe leaving my bike. So there was definitely some areas where I didn't explore enough. Some of the roads were also pretty awful. I didn't really have too many issues with drivers, but there's sections of 17 and North and South Carolina where it's super busy. You don't really have a shoulder. Coming from Jamestown to Virginia Beach was pretty sketchy, and there's a lot of side roads and back roads that turn into soft sand. I hate sand. There were definitely some roads that were not fun to be on at all. Was there any camping areas that I kind of got sketched out on or felt unsafe? Animal wise, not really. There was a couple nights where I heard some coyotes pretty close. There was some nights where you kind of heard weird sounds and you're like, what was that? There's only one night that anything bugged me to the point that I did not end up camping there. But for the most part, other than maybe just the feeling of maybe I shouldn't be here, camping really didn't bother me. I did have a somewhat face-to-face with a bear, although as soon as it saw me, it ran away and I didn't see anything else. Only animal that really tried to hurt me were squirrels, and that was just running out in front of the bike because they're squirrels. So what did I learn? I learned that people are generally good. Of course, on social media and the news, they always talk about the bad things. In general, day-to-day life, people are warm, they love talking, they're curious, they'll help you out in a pinch. There's a couple times I had flat tires and I had tons of people, stop and ask if I need a ride or if I needed anything. And overall, just my experience with pretty much everybody I ran into was a positive one. I also learned that I'm not a big fan of wild camping. I guess I'm not as big as a rule breaker as I kind of think I am sometimes. So just being somewhere that I'm not quite sure I'm supposed to be at makes me not comfortable. What's next? In 2023, I don't have a big ride planned. There's smaller things I want to do. I wanted to do Unbound Gravel, so hopefully I can win the lottery on that one. I want to do Ragbri or the Ride Across Iowa. I've heard nothing but good things about that. One big party. I'd like to maybe go over and do a tour of like Holland, Netherlands, that general area. So I have to see how that goes. But the next big tour I'm looking at will be 2024 at the earliest. But I want to do West Coast to East Coast, taking the northern route. Those are some of the questions I got. Overall, it was a fun trip. I definitely enjoyed doing it. I loved it. I plan on making more content and breaking down some of my gear and some of my experiences I had while on this trip. So make sure to stay tuned for all that. And remember, life is short. Eat the cookie.